Altruism. Altruism is defined as concern for the safety of others, characterized by actions designed to help someone else without regard for one's own self-interest. It involves prioritizing others' needs over personal gain, sometimes even at a personal cost. The act of self-sacrifice for the good of others. It is a desire that must be born from the very depths of your heart, of your desire to save someone who isn't you, no matter what the cost you must have to pay. Altruism is something rare, but something that has always been present in our world, something we have given glory to unlike anything else. The idea of saving another person is something we have inherently associated with the foundation of a hero, someone who wishes to save others and protect them from danger. History and fiction alike speak of the greatness of these heroes, who sacrifice their own being in pursuit of this, and so do we. Which is why as children, many of us often dream of becoming superheroes. The typical story of the hero putting his life on the line to save his friends also fall under a pursuit of altruism. However, something we don't talk about often enough is a burden that they must carry on their shoulders in their pursuit of altruism. This burden is often ignored in face of the glory behind the idea of saving someone else, and often leads to us failing to recognize how this burden changes the working of someone's inner mind in their attempt to carry it. It's something all of us can acknowledge as remarkable and deserving of praise, but something all of us fail to practice because of the importance we give ourselves over what is going on in the lives of others. If we stopped our lives and went out of our way to help someone else's life, we will no longer have enough time for ourselves. Which is why, even though sometimes people notice things are wrong, they don't talk to that person because they know it's a responsibility they might not be able to take care of. Someone designed to truly help someone purely out of the kindness of their heart without demanding anything for compensation, whether that be material or mental, is something truly unlikely in the fast-paced world of the 21st century. This 21st century where sometimes you and I don't even have time to worry about ourselves, let alone time for worrying about others. In a world like this, it's truly hard, if not impossible, to expect someone like a Superman to be there to help you out. But even then, people like that do exist somewhere out there. A person willing to take on the burden of what it means to live the reality of a hero. A person that is willing to move forward steadfast, even with that immeasurable burden that everyone is ignorant about. A person that is willing to suffer agony and beyond for someone else. A person defined by altruism. A person who is envious to a fault. A person like Natsuki Subaru. Before we get into understanding Subaru's altruism, I must give some slight background on Subaru himself. Natsuki Subaru is a type of person you'd originally least expect to follow the path of altruism. He had become a hikikomori after his failed high school debut, given he had lost his final chance of having a way to restart his life from zero. His childhood was the reason behind why he craved for all forms of validation, because the only form in which he had any aspect of himself validated was either through short-lived absurd tactics that weren't truly himself that tried to keep himself interesting and never ending well, both in terms of his slow but obvious academic spiral, him slowly losing all of his friends and everything in between, as all his attempts to be seen as someone special and a person you should be around were wasted. The idea of being a failure because he could not be like his dad had already taken root inside his mind, which was what originally defined his identity. He was seen as Natsuki Subaru, the son of his great father, and not just Natsuki Subaru. Each and every method he tried to use to be able to create a distant personality and identity from his father, who was looked at as someone reliable, resulted in nothing each time, with him losing hope each time he failed. This became the root cause of Subaru building resentment towards specific people who reminded him of the failures he had had in life. Something we see as early as the first very scene and even later on, with him projecting his own issues with his father's name onto Julius in the royal selection. Subaru did have plenty of freedom in what he could have done, gifted with parents who allowed his destructive actions, who were kind enough to give Subaru time to sort it out, without resorting to methods most other parents would have. Subaru himself put what he did best in his rant with Rem. He had all that time, freedom, and what he did with it was nothing. He suffered from collapsing the expectations of others out of him, which is why he ran away from those expectations so he wouldn't have to hold that burden anymore, becoming free by closing himself inside his own world and no longer going to school. When Subaru isekai to Rugunika, it is in the most literal sense. He had been given his second chance in life to restart from zero, given he no longer needed to worry about all of the expectations and the problems he would have to eventually face in his previous life. Someone with a keen eye would actually notice that Subaru's eyes are devoid of light before he was transported, and filled with light once he's transported into the world, as if he'd been waiting for this exact moment to happen in his life until now. The idiotic decisions he'd made both during his younger and current years, none of it mattered. And for someone who didn't see any light in the tunnel, he was suddenly just transported into a world that was filled with nothing but the light he wanted to see. Natsuki Kenji's name would no longer haunt Subaru, now that no one in this world knew about his father. They would only see him as Natsuki Subaru and not as his son first. Subaru did escape the weight of his father's name and expectations, but instead had to borne a weight 1,000 times more heavy, the burden of saving another person's life. At the beginning of the series, the curse of return by death is the only weapon Subaru is given against the hands of fate, and is what gives him this burden, and what gives him the ability to carry it out. Return by death allows him to return after dying and retry once again to do everything as he deems correct, to prevent his own death, but also to prevent the deaths of anyone else he can. The chance to retry gives Subaru a responsibility in his eyes, to use his ability as a way to save people like Emilia, who would have died otherwise, going through difficulty, adversity, and painful death in his attempt to do so. But return by death is much more of a curse than it is a blessing for a person that is as powerless, incapable of doing anything like Natsuki Subaru, by manifesting his inability to give up as his ultimate strength. It is this authority that forces Subaru to learn how to use his mind, body in ways he didn't think were possible without rest until everyone he desired to save is safe in his hands. The process for that, however, requires Subaru to face failure not occasionally, but to a degree uncomparable to someone else, where he has to go through trial and error. Return by death, in a way, is something that psychologically feeds Subaru any sort of purpose he could have. There was always a part of himself he had resented for his inability to do anything, even with the opportunity to do almost anything. But return by death gives him the opportunity to save others, and doing something of value to others. Something he can recognize as significant he is doing that has some meaning. It is why, despite being the fundamental, perhaps the most powerful authority in the entire show, return by death is also perhaps the greatest curse someone like Subaru could have gotten, ultimately becoming the tool he uses to fuel these altruistic desires that become self-destructive, with little room to escape them, and feeding his toxic perception of himself with every mistake he makes. Death as we know it is different compared to how the experience itself is fundamentally like in the world of ReZero. This part might be hard to grasp with just words, but I suggest you try to do this. Close your eyes and focus on your mind. Imagine yourself dying like Subaru does, whether that be through a wound, being eaten, or any of his death you'd rather not experience. Afterwards, with a time gap of precisely 0 seconds before you're sent back in time, you experience your soul being frozen and then shattered into 1,000 pieces, where it is then completely destroyed into nothingness, where you then gain the experience of what nothingness is before getting immediately sent back as something. It's horrible, but it isn't even the worst pain Subaru has to experience in this world. The most scary part in all of this is the loss Subaru has to face. This sensation of loss is something Subaru is fundamentally unable to adapt to, something even 100 million loops in Kasaneru is not able to change, where he is still atrociously scared of the idea of loss, having become the ideal hero by discarding his heart through perfection of his loops, to get across how fundamentally scarring it is. Even more than the physical or mental suffering death causes him, this sensation of the overwhelming loss he feels is what drives him forward. Subaru loves everyone around him, and because of his authority, he knows that he must fulfill this responsibility and prioritize his own mind later, since everything about him is expendable in nature, something to be spent to buy things of value, like the protection and happiness of the people he loves, which is why he doesn't need to spend time taking care of those parts of himself. The payment, or rather more appropriately so-called burden he has to take as a result of his altruistic pursuit, is the pain and suffering death gives him. This loss he feels whenever Subaru lets someone else die is what hurts him, despite him having the ability to retry, which nobody else gets to do. Frustration about how, despite given as many choices as he wants, Subaru still fails and leads everyone he loves to death. The thoughts of how if Natsuki Subaru was someone stronger, smarter, and more capable like the other individuals that surround him emerge in his head, and how they'd do far better if they could also restart like Subaru can. But the sad reality was just that someone as powerless, weak as Natsuki Subaru is the only person given the ability to create miracles and win out against inevitable fate. There was guilt over not being extraordinary enough to be able to ensure everyone is saved. Each time Emilia, Felt, Rem, and many others died, it hurt. Each and every time someone died because of his failure, it hurt, and increased the burden to be better than last time to avoid their deaths and suffering. Unlike previous times, he didn't only carry his own life with the burden he carried, but the fate of the many other people he loved in this world. In the beginning of Arc 3, we see Subaru try to take on the title of Emilia's knight in the ceremony, only to get ridiculed by Julius's beatdown. But his desire to be her knight didn't fade with just that. He wanted to become not only her knight, but also her white knight. He wished to rescue her when no one else was willing to stand up for her, without any of the wisdom or strength required to do so. But he ended up just becoming a public embarrassment for Emilia, and eventually ended up becoming the reason why she died. Subaru hits his limit in Arc 3 because of this once, where he tries to run away by closing his mind instinctively to protect his own self after experiencing the trauma of the first loop. The other after experiencing despair and knowing no matter what he does, it is all going to end up the same way. The burden has once again become too heavy, with no choice but for him to run away from his problems once again by giving up, and creating a world where he doesn't need to worry like he did in his past. He feels guilty over making the people he loves die over and over again, as he continues to loop without even knowing if the people in those worlds are separate from his current world, not knowing if each time he died, he's been leaving numerous worlds behind him to rot away. However, this time around, Subaru had Rem, who was there to tell him about all of his strengths and the things she likes about him, how he was someone who doesn't give up, and more importantly, being given the title of hero. He had someone who knew and believed him as much as someone could, and he had to live up to those expectations Rem had for her hero. If someone had been willing to expect things when no one else would, abandoning him when everyone else did, Subaru himself included did so. Subaru just could not allow himself the option to give up. Rem's hero Natsuki Subaru never gave up, and he had to continue being that hero for as long as he could for the girl who saved him at his worst. All of these circumstances are what create the emotion known as vexation, as the novel appropriately terms it as. Since he loved everyone, Subaru would not give up, no matter what shape the price of this burden took, as long as his vexation with the present was not erased. Subaru wasn't always a hero or even had the desire to be one, given he understood that it was a role that he was simply incapable of ever fulfilling deep down, no matter how attractive it could have been seen as, because he wasn't anything special enough to become a Superman who could carry everything forward. He rejected the very idea of sacrificing yourself for another person when it comes to anyone that isn't himself, because his life will never end unlike their own. But the search for some purpose issues with his self-worth and a need to have something to attach himself to, which made it too easy for his circumstances to craft his hero complex, and his tendencies to defy himself solely on the basis of how much value he has given to others, whether that be Emilia or any of the other people he surrounds himself with, where any of their failure is something he attributes to himself for being incapable. Hero. It's a title we attribute to someone who engages in heroism, saving other people without any selfish reason to do so, with their ability as a hero defined by how many or how much they can save another person. However, at times, the hero forgets about himself entirely, forgetting to include himself in the list of people that should be saved. Which is what exactly happens to Subaru as the way he treats return by death slowly changes throughout the story. As one of the biggest things Season 2 of ReZero focuses on is the idea of whether the way Subaru uses return by death is toxic or not. One of the primary struggles Subaru faced psychologically throughout the series is the ability to assess his own value as a person, often putting himself down as someone useless. In a simple way, you can think of the thought process like this. We all know life is fundamentally something extremely precious to the world, being something that adds color to the world. However, isn't a part of the value that we consider to be precious out of consideration that life, if lost, cannot be recovered? Humans naturally all die without expectations, whether that is through natural or unusual means, with the idea of the value attached to our deaths being that we won't ever speak or think again in the realm of the living, which is why we must hold life closely while we still have it and make the most out of it. Therefore, something like this could be said: death is what makes our lives have meaning. Let's imagine a world where there is no death. Is there really any value you can attach to the idea of life? For someone like Subaru, who had his ability to meet the hand of death stolen from his grasp no matter what he does, just where could he find the value to attach to the life he's living? The answer to that would be attaching value in his role as a hero by sacrificing everything he can do and doing everything in his power no matter what it costs. All of this means that Subaru cannot bear the burden in any way that is connected to providing value to others, besides through the means of his own death to counteract the lack of value of his life. Subaru understands that everyone views him in a glorified perspective, not knowing about how many battles he has lost, not knowing about how many people he has led to death because of his inability as a hero, which is why he always must try to live up to his imposter syndrome, becoming a hero that will be able to become a ray of hope. He must be the one to decide to carry out the hopes, wishes, and emotions of the people from his previous worlds, while also being forgiving of everything that was done wrong by them, as the only person who can decide whether what someone did was wrong or not. As we know from the story, Subaru's perception of constantly failing to live up to the title and implications of what a hero should be capable of haunts him throughout the story. The hero title he was given by Rem ultimately becoming the core reason why he decided to give this speech in Pristella, knowing that he just had to become a bigger hope for many more people like he was for Rem. In the end, similar to before, Subaru himself describes it the best: even if no one else remembers, you must. The reason Natsuki Subaru is not able to die is because of the simplest element in our world: love. The weight of this curse is enforced by the existence of the taboo, which seems to have been a requirement of the contract that exists between Subaru and Satella, of which we really know nothing about, besides being alluded to existing. This taboo behind return by death is what ultimately ensures that the burden put upon himself by his desires is something he fundamentally cannot share with someone else, even if it was something that was likely created to avoid Subaru being taken advantage of. Instead, it becomes something that mentally torments Subaru. Communication is a key factor to the human condition. We are creatures inherently meant to rely on each other as a species focused on social interaction. However, in Subaru's case, he's unable to communicate his problems, how he feels, and the reason he does things specifically because of this taboo. The problem is that this unhealthy mindset is hard to avoid when the weight of these expectations constantly weighs on Subaru, and he doesn't really have an opportunity to think about himself. Subaru just cannot be fully understood and truly talked with without the knowledge of return by death and all the complications it has. There's just so little opportunity for Subaru to get that therapy, and the times he has tried to tell others, it's ended up with him getting hurt or seeing someone he loves get killed. Experiencing death and coming back is someone nobody besides Subaru could ever understand. One of the very first things Subaru learned in this world was how temporary relationships were for someone like him. Subaru spent far more time with everyone he loves compared to the time they spent with him, which is why losing that connection scars him and eventually becomes a catalyst of sort for Subaru's breakdown at the royal capital, when Subaru expects Emilia to understand him and the reason why he did everything despite her not even knowing the reason why Subaru wants to save her. The aftermath of that argument leading to the first time Subaru was truly alone in this world in every sense of the word itself. Subaru immediately cries out when Echidna doesn't die when he violates the taboo. For Subaru, the heaviest thing was always that he was going to always have to bear the burden all on his own, and the inability of his to even share all the suffering he's gone through, which is why he begins to psychologically trust her more despite the many intuitive reasons not to trust of which he'd been given beforehand. Let's go back to the very first episode of ReZero. Subaru's desire began as something small. He was transported to a world he didn't know about, given hopes that he'd become an overpowered protagonist only for all of that to shatter in his face. Meet a cute girl who was willing to wait for him, someone nobody else had done for him in years, and then later become the very reason that girl meets her untimely death, promising to save that very girl no matter what as his dying words. Subaru then persisted multiple times with the desire of wanting to save Emilia and perhaps learn her real name, beating cruel deaths but still not giving up. In a way, that's really all this story is about. I know we talk in excess leisure about the burdens Subaru is dealing with, but ultimately, what defines Natsuki Subaru wasn't his suffering, whether that is mental or physical, but his hope. Subaru, no matter what, never gives up. The witch's love puts a curse on Subaru that does not allow the one she loves to die. Similarly, Subaru puts the same curse that she did onto others to ensure they too don't die, with this being directly referenced during his A Reason to Believe, with his confession of love to Emilia. Some of us treat ReZero as a show for how dark the world really is, to show how scary everything and everyone else is, but it's really just about the suffering Subaru goes through. Similar to real life, the suffering we face in our day-to-day lives is also not what defines all of us, but rather how we deal with that suffering. He's been killed by being impaled multiple times, he's died by jumping onto pointy rocks, he's died in so many different ways that would have to be here for multiple minutes just to list all of the ways he's died and suffered. But in the end, it's still Natsuki Subaru holding on. Tappei considers the main route of ReZero, the envy route, with the opposite of envy being kindness, something that cannot be more embodied by any other character besides Natsuki Subaru. Subaru, through my lens, is what a hero should be defined as. He's someone who's willing to expend everything he has and sacrifice everything he has to offer for others. Willing to go through hell despite not being the usual Superman who could deal with everything all on his own, making his strength his ability to rely on others and to save them in the process. Being unwilling to give up, and that is a human strength. He suffers the most out of everyone. He has to take on such a heavy burden that no one else could understand. He has to withstand loss that only he could understand, and sides of people only he could get the opportunity to see. But in the end, Natsuki Subaru can still smile. Despite everything he's gone through, Natsuki Subaru can still smile and love someone else no matter how long ago he should have lost the ability to do so. Natsuki Subaru is a man built on hope, persevering through unimaginable defeats over and over no matter what adversity he's faced with. He's the embodiment of the human spirit that carried us far enough that you even have the opportunity to hear my voice. I believe one day, Subaru will be able to overcome his self-hatred, loosen the burden, and eventually become someone who lives a life fulfilling enough that his years of suffering were not in vain, and give rise to happiness even beyond that, no matter how unlikely that seems. I won't tell you to admire Subaru's self-destructive habits, his tendencies to hate himself, devalue himself, and the many other things I just did not talk about. In a way, both me and you are much different from Natsuki Subaru in just this one facet, no matter who you are. We're all frustrated when we let defeat overpower us, and let it coerce us into giving up, which is why we don't want to give up. None of us want to feel like we've lost the opportunity of something, no matter what part of life it is. Each and every one of us has a desire to win. In a way, to be human is to have the will to persevere through unimaginable adversities life throws at us, and have the desire to smile and laugh at the end of all of it. This becomes something more expansive in Arc 2, with Subaru willingly jumping off the cliff to ensure the twins wouldn't be separated again, to give those two their happy ending. None of us will ever be as courageous and determined as Natsuki Subaru in his pursuit of altruism, so in a way, he's an unrealistic ideal for any of us to seek, given he's fictional. Subaru carries a burden far too heavy for just a human to carry all on his own, but despite that, Subaru still takes on that burden even if he has to suffer in doing it. If I were to take at least something from Subaru's character, in my opinion, there'll be nothing other than finding courage. That if Subaru can somehow persevere through everything he does, maybe you can too.